I tried to make him jealous. He moved on instead. Except, I wasn't him. I was the one standing behind the counter at Jensen's bookstore, running a finger over the spine of a worn paperback, trying not to look up. And there she was, walking in like she owned the sunlight spilling across the dusty floor. Her heels clicked too loudly. Or maybe it was just that the silence in the shop had grown too heavy. I didn't know her name yet. Everyone called her Ms. Carter in the office across the street, which sounded formal, but somehow not enough. She had that kind of confidence that made you pause mid-thought, like you'd accidentally walked into someone else's movie. Dark hair pulled into a loose bun, a scarf carelessly tossed over her shoulders, eyes that flicked across the shelves like she already knew what she wanted. I kept my gaze low, pretending to alphabetize, though the shelf had been straight since yesterday. My hands fumbled. She stopped a foot away, leaning on the counter. "Do you have the latest edition of the collected essays of Wallace Stevens?" Her voice was calm, but something in the way she tilted her head made it feel like a test. I nodded, fumbling through the stacks, and when I handed it over, our fingers brushed. Just a second, maybe less, but long enough for me to feel the warmth lingering after. She looked up at me then, her eyes catching mine for the tiniest moment, and I almost wanted to ask if she noticed it too. Instead, she smiled, small, knowing, like she'd just discovered a private joke. And then she stepped back, scanning the shelf behind me. I wanted to tell her something, anything, but the words stuck somewhere between my throat and the buzzing fluorescent lights overhead. "You're new," she said, almost as an observation rather than a question. I shrugged. "A few months. Not sure I've figured it all out yet." She laughed softly, that low sound that makes quiet rooms feel crowded. Most people never do. Her gaze drifted to the window, sunlight catching the lines at the corner of her eyes. I wondered, not for the first time, what stories hid behind those glances. She seemed so layered. Experienced, but not weighed down. Confident, but not cocky. And somehow, she made me feel small and reckless all at once. I found myself straightening a stack of poetry books I hadn't meant to touch, just to keep my hands busy while she lingered near the counter. She picked up a worn copy of Leaves of Grass, thumb brushing the cover, and then looked at me again. Something unspoken passed between us, a spark that wasn't quite a smile, a laugh, or a glance. Just a tension that made my chest tighten and my thoughts scatter. "You always keep your hands busy like that?" she asked, nodding toward the books. I hesitated. "It helps me not look stupid." I offered a small grin, but it faltered under the weight of her gaze. She tilted her head, pretending to read the back cover of the book in her hands, but I knew she was watching me. The pause stretched, neither of us moving, just the faint smell of coffee from the corner cafe drifting in through the open door. Then she set the book down, smoothed the scarf over her shoulders again, and turned toward the door. "I should get back," she said softly. And I watched her go, the click of her heels fading, leaving the quiet behind. I didn't know why, but I couldn't stop thinking about the way her fingers lingered on that book. The way she looked at me just once, long enough for the space between us to feel too small. That pause, that spark, had settled somewhere deep in my chest, and I had a feeling it wasn't going anywhere soon. It was one of those slow, half-empty afternoons at the bookstore. The sunlight stretched across the shelves in long, lazy stripes, dust motes drifting in the golden light. I was rearranging the new arrivals when I saw her hesitate at the corner of the fiction section, holding a stack of books that looked heavier than her arms could manage. "Need a hand?" I asked, stepping toward her. She glanced at me, eyes narrowing slightly, like she wasn't sure if she should trust the offer. I've got it," she said quickly, but her fingers slipped on the top book, almost sending it tumbling. I caught it before it hit the floor, holding it out to her. "See? Easy." My voice was light, but my hands still lingered on hers as I passed the book back. She straightened, smoothing the crease in her scarf, a faint sigh escaping. I noticed how tired her eyes looked, the way her fingers trembled just slightly when she adjusted the stack. There was a quiet weight to her, something she wasn't saying, and it made me want to know more, even though I knew I probably shouldn't. "Thanks," she muttered, more softly this time, and for a moment, the usual wall she carried slipped. Her shoulders hunched a little, like she had been holding them high all day. I didn't comment. I just watched, trying not to seem obvious. Her laugh came next. Low, brief, a sound meant more for herself than anyone else. It made the corner of my chest tighten, the way a soft breeze can push at an open window and make the room feel smaller, warmer, somehow more intimate. We moved through the aisles together, her pace deliberate, guarded. I noticed small things. The faint crease where she always rubbed the back of her hand against her palm. The way she glanced at the clock as if counting down some invisible timer. The subtle way she avoided meeting my eyes when a customer passed too close. She carried a quiet vulnerability, though she wouldn't admit it, and I felt like I was inching closer to something I shouldn't touch. "Do you always organize by genre first?" she asked suddenly, breaking the rhythm of silence. I shrugged. Mostly, but sometimes it depends on the mood of the day. I tried to keep my tone casual, even as my pulse quickened. She laughed again, softer this time, a little breathless, and glanced at me like she was testing a theory. The light caught her hair, a dark halo against the golden sunbeam, and I realized I was staring. Embarrassed, I looked down at the stack in my hands, but the warmth of that laugh lingered, settling behind my ribs. She paused at the end of the aisle, brushing her fingers along the edge of a shelf. The motion was absent-minded, delicate, and for a moment, she looked fragile. I wanted to say something, anything, to ease it, but all I could do was mirror her gesture subtly, letting my hand rest near hers without touching. "All right," she said finally, setting the last book down. "I think that's enough for today." Her voice carried a quiet finality, but there was an unspoken tension, a thread connecting us that neither of us wanted to sever yet. I nodded, trying to hide the way my chest still felt tight. She looked at me for a heartbeat longer than necessary, and I caught the faintest trace of something unspoken in her gaze, a hesitation, a spark, maybe even curiosity. Then she turned, walking toward the door, leaving the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the sunlit aisle. I stood there for a long moment, hands empty, heart heavier, feeling the pull of something forbidden, something fragile, something I couldn't stop noticing. The rain started softly at first, tapping against the bookstore windows like it was hesitating. By the time we were closing, it had turned into a steady drizzle, blurring the streetlights into golden streaks. She was still there, finishing a stack of invoices at the counter, her scarf draped carelessly over her chair, sleeves rolled up. "I can walk you to your car," I offered, though part of me already knew she'd refuse. She didn't answer immediately, just kept her eyes on the papers in front of her, tapping a pen against the desk. Finally, she said, "It's fine. I live close." There was a pause, long enough for the space between us to feel smaller, heavier, and I wanted to reach across it, wanted to say something that mattered, but the words wouldn't come. She sighed, leaning back in her chair, fingers brushing her forehead. I noticed the faint tremor in her hands, the way her lips pressed together as if holding herself in check. There was something she wasn't saying, and I felt the pull of it, tight and unrelenting, like holding your breath too long. The quiet was broken by the sudden ring of her phone. She picked it up, glanced at the screen, and her expression shifted, fleeting tension, subtle, just a shadow. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I saw her eyes flicker, her jaw tighten ever so slightly. Whoever it wasn't her. She hung up, setting the phone down with a careful precision, almost as if she was rearranging her own heart. "Nothing important," she muttered, but the pause lingered like an unspoken confession. I wanted to ask, wanted to press, but I only nodded, forcing a small smile. Instead, I leaned against the counter, just close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her, close enough to notice the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the paper dust and wet air. Our knees brushed under the counter, just for a moment, a subtle reminder that distance didn't always protect you. She looked up then, eyes meeting mine with something unreadable, amusement, hesitation, maybe even regret. The corner of her mouth twitched, a smile that didn't reach her eyes fully. I caught my own breath, and in that instant, I knew that saying the wrong thing could ruin the fragile balance we'd built. "Do you ever feel like time just slips away?" I asked, voice softer than I intended. My own words surprised me. She blinked, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to us. The rain, the low hum of fluorescent lights, the faint scent of wet asphalt outside. Sometimes, she said finally, and her voice was almost a whisper, carrying something she wouldn't put into the open. We stood there, close, suspended in the quiet tension between words and unsaid confessions. I wanted to reach out, to brush a strand of hair from her face, to close the distance entirely. My hand lifted, hesitated, and then froze mid-air. The sudden beep of the shop alarm shattered the moment, and she jumped slightly, pulling back, her eyes wide with startled clarity. I lowered my hand slowly, silently, our nearness dissolved by the mundane, and I felt that familiar tug in my chest, longing, restraint, and the knowledge that I'd come dangerously close to crossing a line we weren't ready for. She gathered her things, tugging her scarf over her shoulders, and I watched the tension in her fade into polite calm. But even as she smiled and said goodbye, I could still feel the echo of that moment, a brush of possibility that left me restless long after the rain had faded. The cafe was almost empty, the late afternoon sunlight muted behind gray clouds. She stirred her coffee absently, fingers tracing the rim of the cup, and I sat across from her, hands wrapped around my own mug as if it could hold me together. We hadn't spoken much since that night in the bookstore, the memory of rain and near touch still pressing against my chest. The silence between us felt heavy, the kind that doesn't need words but makes every glance loaded with unsaid things. "I don't understand," she said finally, voice low, uncertain, almost trembling. Her eyes were fixed somewhere beyond the window, watching people pass without noticing. I waited, unsure if she meant the books, the rain, or the tension that had been threading us together for weeks. She turned then, slow, deliberate, gaze locking with mine. "What are we doing?" she asked, and it wasn't a question about the shop, or coffee, or the ordinary routine. It was a question about the pause that had grown between us, about the unspoken pull, about the way proximity had started to feel like gravity. I swallowed, words sticking somewhere behind my ribs. "I don't know," I admitted. My voice sounded smaller than I intended. I wanted to add something, to define it, to make sense of the tug in my chest, but the right words didn't exist. She let out a small, humorless laugh, eyes flicking away for a moment. "I think that's the problem," she said softly. Her hands tightened around the cup, knuckles pale. "We can't pretend anymore. It's not normal, this, whatever it is between us." I noticed the little things, the way her shoulders slumped despite her usual poise, the faint crease in her forehead, the way her lips pressed together like she was holding herself back. Vulnerable, real, and for some reason, the sight of it made my own chest ache. "I keep thinking about it," I said, finally letting a fraction of the tension escape. "About you. About this." My words sounded clumsy, inadequate, but I couldn't take them back. She nodded slowly, as if hearing it confirmed something she already knew. "I notice it too," she admitted, almost in a whisper, eyes dropping to her hands. "Every time you're around, I feel exposed. And I hate that I feel that way." We sat like that, two fragile people in a quiet cafe, the world moving on around us while we clung to a silence too loaded to break. I wanted to reach for her, to close the space, to say it all in one impossible gesture. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, she looked up, and for a heartbeat, we were connected in a way that no words could carry. And then she spoke again, slower, with a weight that sank straight into my chest. "I don't know if I can stop thinking about you, and I'm scared of what that means." The words hung between us, fragile and devastating, the kind that left the air trembling and hearts unsteady. I wanted to say something, anything, to ease it, but all I could do was meet her gaze and let the silence answer for me. I found her in the storage room behind the counter, crouched in front of a low shelf, a stack of old receipts in her hands. The light was dim, and the air smelled faintly of dust and coffee. "You okay?" I asked, stepping closer. My voice sounded too loud, too intrusive, but she didn't look up. She shook her head slightly, tracing the edge of a faded photograph tucked between two receipts. "I found something," she murmured. Her voice was fragile, uneven, like it belonged to someone else entirely. I crouched beside her, careful not to crowd her space. The photo was old, edges curled, black and white, a younger version of her, laughing with someone I didn't recognize. Something in her expression froze me. "That's before?" I asked quietly. "Before everything fell apart," she said, voice low. Her fingers lingered on the paper, thumb brushing over a faint crease. "I lost him. Not in the way you think. I just didn't hold on. And I've carried that with me ever since." I swallowed, unsure what to say. There was no dramatic confession here, no shouting, no tears spilling over. Just the quiet weight of her honesty, a fracture she had carried alone. "I didn't know," I said finally. "I can't imagine," my words faltered. I wanted to say more, to offer comfort. But she didn't need comfort. She needed acknowledgement, and even that felt delicate, like a vase that could shatter with a wrong word. She looked at me then, eyes misty, the light catching the subtle lines on her face, the ones I hadn't noticed before. "It's not about you," she said softly, almost hurriedly. "It's about me. And sometimes, I feel like I'm too far gone to start over." I wanted to tell her she wasn't. I wanted to tell her she was more than her regrets, more than her past, but the words stayed lodged somewhere in my throat. Instead, I reached out slowly, letting my hand hover near hers without touching. Her breath hitched, a soft, almost inaudible sound, and she glanced down at our near contact. The tension was there, raw, quiet, but undeniable. She didn't pull away, but she didn't move closer either. "I'm not asking for anything," she whispered. "Just for you to see that I'm still here, still trying, still," she trailed off, unable to finish the thought, leaving it hanging in the dim light like smoke. I nodded silently. Words felt inadequate. My chest ached in that quiet, human way, the kind that doesn't need a climax to be felt fully. Then she placed the photo back in the envelope, sliding it into her bag with deliberate care. Her fingers brushed mine for just a second longer than necessary, a ghost of contact that left me trembling in a way I couldn't name. She stood, straightening her scarf, lifting her gaze to mine. For a moment, the room seemed suspended, the air dense with things unspoken. And then she said, softly but with a weight I couldn't shake, "I've carried this for so long. I didn't think anyone would notice." I watched her walk away, heart unsteady, realizing that something had shifted. Not with words, not with grand gestures, just with the simple, seismic truth of seeing her, truly, in her quiet vulnerability. The bookstore was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that wasn't empty, but filled with anticipation, with all the small things that had been left unsaid. She leaned against the counter, a worn notebook open in front of her, scribbled notes curling along the edges of the page. I sat across from her, coffee untouched, feeling the hum of the space between us like a living thing. "You don't have to say anything," she murmured, glancing up with a small, tired smile. Her eyes lingered on mine, steady but cautious, like she was testing the air, the space, the possibility of this. I nodded, words useless. All I could do was move a little closer, letting the chair scrape softly against the tile. The subtle shift closed a fraction of the distance that had been building for weeks, months, the distance between hesitation and inevitability. Her hand brushed mine as she reached for a pen, and we froze a second too long. Not a spark, not a declaration, just the quiet acknowledgement of presence. I didn't pull away. Neither did she. We shared the silence that followed, letting it carry everything our words had failed to. The storm from a few days ago had passed, leaving behind the soft scent of rain lingering in the bookstore's open windows. And in that calm, in the steady rhythm of each other's breathing, the tension of all our unspoken thoughts began to settle, quietly, finally. "I've noticed," I said softly, the words coming out almost as a sigh. Not a confession, not a plea, just recognition. She smiled faintly, shoulders relaxing for the first time in days. "I've noticed too," she replied, eyes flicking down to our hands resting near each other on the counter. "And I think we can try to be honest, at least with ourselves. No grand gestures, no dramatic pronouncements. Just that simple acknowledgement, the shared understanding that what had been impossible to define was now, quietly, real. Her fingers found mine again, this time deliberately, and I held her hand without thinking, letting the warmth of her skin steady the trembling I hadn't realized I was carrying. It wasn't a leap into love. It was a settling, an acceptance, a quiet surrender to what had been building in the spaces between us. We sat like that for a long moment, coffee growing cold, notebooks forgotten, the world shrinking to just the soft weight of her hand in mine. Not passion, not urgency, just the gentle inevitability of two people finally allowing themselves to exist in the same space without pretense. She leaned forward slightly, resting her forehead against my temple. The gesture was small, intimate, unspoken. It wasn't a promise of forever, not yet. But it was enough. And when she pulled back just slightly, enough to look at me again, I realized that the tension, the longing, the hesitation, it had finally softened. We were here, together, quietly, and for the first time, it felt like being seen, fully, and without expectation. The bookstore remained still, lights dimming as evening settled in, and I understood that this was enough. For now, it's been months since that evening in the bookstore, the one where everything shifted without a word, without a declaration. I still remember the quiet weight of her hand in mine, the soft press of her forehead against my temple. That small, unremarkable moment changed everything, though at the time it felt like nothing at all. I think about it often, the way she moves through a room, still confident, still layered, still carrying her past with dignity. And yet, now, there's a lightness to her I hadn't seen before. A softness that comes from knowing someone else has seen you, truly seen you, and stayed anyway. For me, I've learned patience in ways I didn't expect. I've learned how to notice the little things, a tremor in a hand, a glance held too long, the way silence can speak louder than words. I've realized that love isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, slow, and almost imperceptible until one day you can't imagine life without it. We don't have a storybook romance. There are still awkward pauses, still days where the world presses in, still moments when I catch her looking at me and I wonder what she's thinking. But there's honesty now. And in that honesty, there's trust, respect, and the kind of connection that doesn't need to shout to exist. Sometimes I catch myself smiling at a memory, a glance, a laugh, a near moment that didn't fully happen but left its mark anyway. She's taught me that love doesn't have to be explosive to be profound. It can exist in the small, careful gestures, in the spaces between words, in shared silences that carry more meaning than 1,000 confessions. And for her, I hope she's learned that letting someone in doesn't have to erase strength or independence. That vulnerability isn't weakness, but a doorway to connection that is both fragile and resilient at the same time. We still stumble through the ordinary, navigate the unexpected, and sometimes misread each other entirely. But now we do it together. There's no rush, no pressure. Just the steady, quiet knowledge that we've chosen to exist in each other's orbit, and that choice alone is enough. I trace the outline of her hand on the counter sometimes, remembering the gentle pressure, the warmth, the quiet declaration it carried. I carry it with me, even when she's not around, a reminder that the most profound moments don't always need grand gestures. And maybe that's the lesson. Love isn't always fireworks or sweeping confessions. Sometimes it's holding a hand, sitting side by side in silence, letting the weight of life settle softly around you, knowing that someone is there. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this? Because, honestly, the quiet ones often stay with us the longest.